I stood in the corner of the ballroom, holding a tray of drinks because someone had assumed I was staff. Then I heard my cousin laugh and say, "Don't mind her, she's basically the maid anyway." I smiled and walked straight to the mic. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching this from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. The invitation came 2 months in advance. A pale pink envelope with gold foil lettering that read, "You are cordially invited to the union of Layla and Daniel." It was my cousin Layla's wedding, an event that had been in the works since the day she met Daniel during a summer internship 3 years ago. My name, handwritten on the envelope in delicate cursive, looked like it belonged. But deep down, I knew it didn't. Not to them. I wasn't really family, at least not in the way they valued it. I was the girl who always helped clean up after dinner, who was expected to run errands quietly, who got left out of group photos and inside jokes. I was the cousin by obligation, not affection. Still, I RSVP'd yes. Because showing up was something I had taught myself to do, even when no one seemed to care whether I did or not. My parents passed away in a car accident when I was 10. It happened suddenly. An ordinary evening turned into a nightmare that shattered my world. After that, I was taken in by my Uncle Tariq, my father's older brother. He and his wife, my Aunt Farah, had 2 children of their own, including Layla, who was a year older than me. What started out as a temporary arrangement became permanent, though no one ever said it out loud. I lived in the guest room. I ate at the table. I smiled in family photos. But I always felt the unspoken rule. I was there, but I wasn't theirs. Not really. Growing up with Layla was like living beside a firework. She was loud, vibrant, and constantly the center of attention. Everyone adored her, from family friends to school teachers. She had a way of lighting up a room without trying, while I existed somewhere in the corners, unnoticed. I didn't mind it at first. But as we got older, the difference became harder to ignore. Layla went to a private school. I stayed in public. Layla had piano lessons, a closet full of clothes, and a new phone every year. I made do with hand-me-downs and second-hand notebooks. I wasn't jealous, at least, not exactly. I just wanted to be seen as her equal. But that never happened. To her, I was just Cousin Zara, the quiet one. The helper. The shadow. By the time we were in college, our lives had diverged entirely. Layla majored in event planning, fitting for someone who had a natural flair for attention, and I went into communications, focusing on public speaking and storytelling. I paid my way through school with scholarships and part-time work. I joined the debate team and started giving speeches at youth conferences, slowly building a reputation for my clarity and confidence on stage. It became my secret power, the one place I wasn't invisible. But no one in the family knew that. At home, I still played the same role. The quiet girl who folded napkins at parties and disappeared when it was time for group photos. When the wedding preparations began, I wasn't surprised when Layla didn't ask me to be a bridesmaid. I wasn't hurt, either. I had long stopped expecting inclusion. I offered to help wherever needed. My aunt handed me a list of errands. My uncle asked me to coordinate airport pickups for guests. I did it all without complaint. Even when Layla barely acknowledged me during the fittings or tastings. Even when she snapped at me for placing the wrong colored ribbon on a gift box. "Honestly, Zara," she said once with an exaggerated sigh, "it's not that hard." I bit my tongue. I was used to this version of her. Entitled. Dismissive. I told myself to be patient. It was just a wedding. Soon it would be over. The day of the wedding arrived like a storm. The venue was grand. A luxurious hall bathed in gold chandeliers and floral arrangements that cost more than my annual rent. Guests bustled and dressed in designer outfits. Music played softly in the background as servers floated around with champagne trays. I wore a simple maroon dress I had borrowed from a friend, along with a pair of heels I'd bought secondhand. I had done my makeup carefully, curling my hair into soft waves. I looked good, I thought, professional, elegant. But the moment I stepped into the bridal suite to check on Layla, she barely looked up. "Oh good. Zara, can you help the makeup artist unpack the brushes? She's running behind." I nodded. Of course. As the evening unfolded, I kept busy. I checked in with the caterers, helped an elderly guest find their seat, smoothed a wrinkle in the flower girl's dress. No one thanked me, but I wasn't doing it for praise. I just wanted the day to go smoothly. Until the moment that would change everything. It happened right after dinner, when the DJ announced the open mic portion of the evening. A chance for close friends and family to say a few words. I stood near the side of the room, sipping water, when I heard someone laugh behind me. I turned slightly and saw Layla talking to a small group of her friends. One of them pointed at me and said something I couldn't hear. That's when Layla, without missing a beat, smiled and replied loudly enough for several people to catch it. "Oh, that's just Zara. Basically the maid. She's been helping all day." Laughter followed. A few turned to look at me, some with pity, some with amusement. My face burned. My fingers gripped the glass tighter. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Maid. The word echoed in my mind. Not cousin. Not helper. Maid. I stood there for a few seconds, stunned. I could have walked away. I could have swallowed the insult like so many others. But something inside me cracked. Not with pain, but with clarity. I had spent years making myself smaller. Biting my tongue. Hiding my voice. But not tonight. Not anymore. As the DJ prepared to hand the mic to the next speaker, I walked across the hall. Calm, deliberate. People turned to watch, murmuring. I reached the stage, smiled politely, and took the microphone. The room fell silent. I glanced at Layla, whose smile faded into confusion. I cleared my throat, heart pounding in my chest. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Zara, Layla's cousin. Or, as she so kindly put it a few minutes ago, the maid. Gasps scattered across the room. I didn't flinch. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," I continued. "But I realized, maybe I should. Because tonight isn't just about the bride and groom. It's about the people who helped build them, shape them, and support them, even when it wasn't acknowledged." Layla's eyes widened. Daniel looked uncomfortable. My uncle and aunt froze in their seats. But I didn't stop. I've known Layla since we were kids. I grew up in her home. Ate meals with her family. Spent holidays helping clean, cook, organize. Not because I had to, but because I thought that's what family did. That if I gave enough, maybe someday, I'd be seen as one of them. Equal. Important. I spent years trying to earn love that should have been given freely. Now you could hear a pin drop. No music. No chatter. Just silence. "I don't need that anymore," I said. "Because I've learned something important. I don't need validation from people who never bothered to see me. I've made a life for myself. One built on my own terms. I speak on stages. I lead workshops. I empower others to find their voice. And tonight, I decided to finally use mine, for myself." I handed the mic back to the DJ and walked off stage. There was no applause. Not yet. Just stunned faces. But I didn't need claps. I needed that moment, for me. And I had taken it. As I stepped off the stage, I felt a strange kind of calm wash over me. It wasn't the type of calm that comes from resolution, but the stillness that follows after you've stood up for yourself, fully and unapologetically. I could still feel the eyes on me, some wide with disbelief, others shifting awkwardly away as if unsure where to place their loyalty now. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The damage, or the revelation, was already done. And in my mind, I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cursed. I had spoken truth. And it had landed like a stone in the center of still water, rippling through every corner of that glossy ballroom. I walked quietly out of the reception hall and down the hallway to the coat check. My legs felt like they were moving on their own. My heart was still racing, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was strange. How easy it was to fall back into silence after making the loudest noise of your life. I stepped outside into the cool night air, letting it fill my lungs. The stars were out, glittering above like tiny spectators to the scene I had just left behind. I stood there for a few moments, alone, until I heard someone call my name. It was Aunt Farah. She stepped outside hesitantly, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes were unreadable, but her voice carried that familiar blend of sharpness and guilt. "Zara," she said softly, "what was that?" I turned to face her, calm but firm. That was the truth. I replied. Something none of you ever wanted to hear. She didn't deny it. She just sighed. You embarrassed Layla. On her wedding day. I tilted my head. And she humiliated me in front of dozens of strangers. Which one of us was supposed to stay quiet? Aunt Farah looked down, as if the ground might have answers she couldn't find in my face. We took you in, you know. We gave you a home. That old line. Polished, familiar, soaked in silent conditions. Yes, I said. And for that I was always grateful. But giving me a place to sleep isn't the same as treating me like family. You never made me feel wanted. Only tolerated. She didn't have a response. Just a slight shake of the head, and then she walked back inside. I stood there for a while longer, until the chill pushed me to return. When I stepped back into the reception hall, the mood had shifted. The DJ had resumed playing soft music. Layla was nowhere in sight. Daniel looked tense, seated beside his groomsmen, avoiding everyone's gaze. A few guests gave me tight, awkward nods, while others looked away completely. But one person came straight toward me. My Uncle Tariq. His steps were slow, deliberate, hands clasped in front of him like he was trying to find the right posture for confrontation. Zara, he said, his voice low. That was unexpected. I looked him in the eye. Was it? I asked. You've seen it all these years. You just never did anything about it. He blinked slowly, caught off guard by my directness. I didn't know it hurt you that much, he admitted. You always seemed fine. That sentence, that common excuse, hit harder than I expected. That's because I had no choice. I couldn't afford to break down. I stayed quiet because it was the only way to survive under your roof. But silence doesn't mean peace, Uncle. It just means fear. He looked away then for the first time, his shoulders slumping ever so slightly. Maybe we failed you, he murmured. No, I corrected. You abandoned me in plain sight. That moment between us, charged with years of unspoken resentment, was broken when a voice called from behind. Zara. It was Daniel. I turned, genuinely surprised. He looked nervous, but sincere. Can we talk? He asked. I nodded and followed him to a quiet corner near the photo booth, now abandoned. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly before speaking. I didn't know she said that about you, he started. I mean, I heard the laughter, but I thought it was just a joke. I didn't realize. His voice trailed off. It wasn't just that one comment, I said quietly. It's been years of being treated like I was lucky just to be present. Like I was never enough. Like I was invisible unless something needed to be cleaned or fixed. Daniel looked genuinely upset. I had no idea, he repeated. And I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I think what you did took guts. You spoke with more grace and truth in 5 minutes than most people manage in a lifetime. I was taken aback by his honesty. I had no opinion of him before. He was just Layla's fiancé. But now, I could see a flicker of decency in him that was rare in that circle. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. He smiled faintly. She's furious, by the way, he added. She says you ruined her big day. I smiled back, but it didn't reach my eyes. No, I said. She ruined it the moment she thought it was okay to reduce someone else to nothing. After that, I kept my distance for the rest of the night. The celebration limped on. The cake was cut, the dances were performed, and the bride eventually returned with swollen eyes and forced smiles. I wasn't approached again. I left early, slipping away while everyone was distracted with sparklers outside. No dramatic goodbyes. Just quiet steps and a clear mind. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop. Social media posts, whispers from distant relatives, private messages. Some people were angry. Others praised my courage. A few said I had tainted a sacred day. But many others, people I hadn't heard from in years, reached out to say they had felt the same way growing up. The ignored cousins. The uninvited siblings. The ones who were always expected to stay quiet so the family could maintain its pretty facade. One message stood out. It was from my younger cousin Lena, who wrote, "Thank you for saying what I've never been brave enough to say. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for all of us." That message stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, I kept living my life. I focused on my work, delivered 2 keynote talks, and and was invited to do a podcast on women reclaiming space in toxic families. The story had struck a nerve, and slowly, people began to see me differently. Not as the girl who disappeared into the kitchen, but as someone with a voice. With value. A month after the wedding, I received a formal invitation to a brunch at my uncle's house. A family reconciliation, it said. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or roll my eyes. But I went. Because sometimes healing isn't for them, it's for you. When I arrived, Layla was there, sitting stiffly on the couch. My aunt and uncle were already nervously pouring tea. For a while, no one spoke. Then Layla looked at me, really looked, not with disdain, but with something close to remorse. "I'm sorry," she said simply. I didn't realize how deep it went. I was cruel. I just thought. You were used to it. I nodded. "That's the problem," I said. "That you thought I should be used to being treated that way." We didn't hug. There were no tears. But something shifted in that room. A recognition. And sometimes that's enough. That night, I went home and looked at myself in the mirror. Not the maid. Not the shadow. Not the helper. Just me. Zara. Finally seen. The weeks after the wedding were oddly quiet. I went back to my regular life. My job at the Youth Empowerment Center, my weekend workshops, my quiet evenings alone with a book and tea, but something had shifted. It wasn't just that I had finally spoken up in front of my entire extended family, or that Layla's wedding video had mysteriously been edited to exclude the entire mic moment. It was more that I had crossed an invisible line, one that most people spend their lives too afraid to approach. I had said the one thing you're never supposed to say in a family that thrives on appearances. The truth. And once you say it, there's no taking it back. No pretending you didn't see what you saw or feel what you felt. You're not allowed to go back to being invisible after that. People either look at you differently, or they stop looking at all. My phone buzzed far less now. Those daily check-ins from Aunt Farah about some small errand had disappeared. Layla had unfollowed me on every social platform. And my uncle hadn't spoken to me since I walked out of their post-wedding reconciliation brunch without offering the neat, clean forgiveness he seemed to expect. But oddly enough, I wasn't lonely. I felt light. As if I had finally stepped out from under a heavy invisible weight I'd carried since I was 10 years old. For once, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to laugh at half-hearted jokes or nod in agreement while someone minimized my life. Instead, I poured that energy into my speaking. After the wedding, someone in the audience had uploaded a partial clip of my speech. It hadn't gone viral, but it had found its way to the right corners of the internet. Small groups and forums where people talked about family dynamics, generational trauma, and the struggle to break free from cycles of silence. I was invited to speak on 2 panels, one at a women's college and another at a nonprofit focused on inner-city youth. I told my story, not to shame anyone, but to show that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight inside our own homes. The ones no one else sees. And each time I finished speaking, someone would come up afterward, tears in their eyes, and say, "I thought it was just me." But life doesn't stay still for long. Just when I had begun to find my new rhythm, I received an email that made my breath catch. It was from Layla. The subject line simply read, "Please." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message inside was brief, uncharacteristically so. She wrote, "Zara, I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything. But I need your help. It's about Grandma's will. Can we talk?" For a second, I actually laughed. After months of silence, after being humiliated and discarded like an afterthought, now she wanted to talk about money? I was tempted to delete it without replying. But something about the way she wrote, "Please," stayed with me. It wasn't her usual bratty, manipulative voice. It sounded raw. So I replied, "I'll meet you tomorrow. 5 p.m. Café Noor." The next day, I arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table by the window. Layla walked in wearing a long beige trench coat and dark sunglasses, like she was trying to hide. She slid into the chair across from me, removed the sunglasses, and to my surprise, her eyes were red and puffy. No makeup. No jewelry. Just her. She didn't waste time. "Grandma passed away last night." I blinked. "What?" I thought she was doing better. She was. Then she wasn't. It was sudden. I didn't know what to say. Layla and I had both grown up under our grandmother's stern but loving gaze. She was the only person in the family who had treated me with any consistent kindness. She never interfered, but she never looked through me either. She would knit sweaters for me in the winter, slip an extra piece of cake on my plate when no one was looking. Once when I was 16, I found a birthday card tucked under my pillow with a small note, "I see you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm sorry," I said softly. Layla nodded, then slid a folder across the table. "This is the will." I opened it, scanning quickly until I saw the part that explained why she had called me. My eyes widened. "She left me the house?" Layla looked down at her untouched coffee. "Yes. And not just the house. Most of her savings. Jewelry. The car. Everything. Except a few sentimental pieces." I felt like I'd been slapped by a wave of shock. I hadn't spoken to Grandma much in the last year. My work schedule had been too packed, and Layla had monopolized family time like always. Yet she had left everything to me? "Why?" I whispered. Layla gave a half-bitter, half-defeated smile. "Because she saw you. She always did. She told Mom once that you were the most grateful person she had ever known. That you carried more burden than any child should have, and yet you never made it anyone else's problem." I felt tears sting my eyes. "She said you deserved something that was truly yours. Something no one could take or minimize. She wanted you to have peace." Layla looked at me then, and her voice cracked. "I don't care about the house. Or the money. But I need your help." "With what?" She leaned in. "Mom and Dad are furious. They're trying to contest the will. They said Grandma must have been confused. They want to say she was manipulated." She hesitated, then added, "They want to say you pressured her." A cold, sick feeling washed over me. "That's a lie," I said. "I know it is. But they're desperate. If this gets to court, they'll drag you through the mud. They'll destroy your name, your reputation, whatever they can touch." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or scream. "And you came to me? Because you want me to give it up?" "No," she said quickly. "I came because I want to help you keep it." My jaw clenched. "Why?" Layla exhaled. "Because I was horrible to you. And I'm not saying that because I suddenly grew a conscience. I'm saying it because seeing Grandma in that hospital bed, gone, I realized I've spent my whole life chasing approval from people who don't even know how to love properly. And when I watched you walk off that stage at my wedding, I realized you're the only one in this family who truly knows what strength looks like." I didn't answer. She pushed a small envelope toward me. "This is a letter from Grandma. For you." She left it in her nightstand. I took it, hands trembling. Layla stood up. "I'll be on your side. In court. In the family. Wherever. You deserve everything she left you, Zara. I'm just sorry I never said that before." And with that, she left. I waited until I got home to open the letter. It was short. Just a few lines written in shaky but familiar handwriting. "My dearest Zara, you were never the maid. You were the light. I'm sorry I didn't protect you more. But now, I give you something no one else can take. A place that's yours. A peace you've earned. With love. Nanny." I cried. Not because I had inherited a house, but because for the first time in my life, someone had called me theirs, without condition, without hesitation. I folded the letter and placed it gently in my drawer. Let the STRM come. I was no longer afraid. The days following Layla's visit were a blur of emotion, paperwork, and subtle dread. The letter from Nanny stayed on my nightstand like a quiet shield, a reminder of love without strings. I read it every night before bed, tracing each line like a prayer. Still, I couldn't ignore the legal storm gathering just beyond the horizon. True to Layla's warning, my aunt and uncle filed a formal petition to contest the will 3 days later. Their claim was textbook: undue influence, diminished mental capacity, questionable last-minute amendments. The worst part wasn't their accusation. It was how unsurprising it was. For people who had spent their lives clinging to power in the family like oxygen, losing control wasn't just inconvenient, it was existential. I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted. And yet, for Valeria, for every version of myself that had been silenced, overlooked or humiliated, I knew I had to stand my ground. I hired a lawyer, someone sharp and emotionally intelligent, who believed that family battles like these were often about more than inheritance. They were about long-standing pain no one ever wanted to name. When we met for the first time, she listened patiently, taking notes while I recounted not just what Nanny had left me, but why. She asked, "Did your grandmother have a history of mental decline?" I shook my head. If anything, she was the sharpest one in the house. Until the end, she remembered everyone's birthdays, even my favorite childhood book. The lawyer smiled. "Then you have a strong case. But be prepared, they're going to dig deep." I nodded. I already knew that. My family had a way of turning even the smallest memory into a weapon if it meant preserving their pride. The first hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. I wore a simple navy blue dress, my hair pulled back, my grandmother's delicate gold watch on my wrist. It was the only thing I had taken from the house before the legal process locked everything up. Layla was already inside when I arrived. She looked composed but pale, her shoulders stiff under her blazer. When our eyes met, she gave me a small nod. It wasn't a warm greeting, but it was a signal. "I'm here, and I haven't changed my mind." Aunt Farah and Uncle Tariq sat across the aisle. Farah's expression was sour, like someone who had bitten into something rotten. Uncle Tariq avoided my gaze entirely. When the judge entered, the courtroom settled into silence. The arguments began. Their lawyer, an older man with a clipped tone and an expensive pen, insisted that the will had been suspiciously generous and suspiciously timed. He claimed that I had manipulated Nanny in her final months, convincing her to make drastic changes out of guilt or confusion. I almost laughed. As if guilt was something Nanny had ever needed to be prompted to feel. My own lawyer responded with calm precision. She presented signed medical evaluations, time-stamped video calls, and even a witness testimony from Nanny's neighbor who had seen me visit regularly. Never asking for anything, always bringing groceries and quietly leaving after a short chat. When Layla took the stand, I held my breath. She sat upright, cleared her throat, and looked the judge in the eye. "My cousin did not manipulate our grandmother," she said. "If anything, I did. I was the one who treated Nanny like a prize to be inherited, not a person. Zara was the only one who ever treated her like she still mattered when everyone else was too busy to call. She never asked for anything. That's exactly why Nanny trusted her." There was a pause in the room after her words, the kind of pause that happens when truth finally cuts through performance. Even the opposing lawyer adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. The hearing ended with the judge ordering a temporary hold on the will's execution until the final ruling, which would come the following week. Outside the courthouse, Layla and I stood awkwardly by the steps. She looked tired. "I meant what I said in there," she told me. "I know," I replied. Then, after a moment, I asked, "Why are you really doing this?" She hesitated. "Because it's the first time I've ever respected myself. I've spent my whole life trying to win their approval. It never worked. But standing beside you, standing up for the truth, I felt different. Like maybe I'm not a coward anymore." That night, I walked past the old family house. It stood cold and still behind the locked gate, the lights off, its windows blank. It no longer felt like a place of belonging or warmth. It was just a building now. A building filled with echoes of everything I had outgrown. I didn't want it because it was big or valuable. I wanted it because it was the first time someone had said, "This is yours. You deserve this." And I wasn't going to let them take that away. The final hearing came quicker than expected. I didn't sleep the night before. My dreams were a mess of childhood memories. Layla throwing tantrums while I swept rice off the floor, Aunt Farah snapping her fingers at me during dinners, Nanny slipping me candy when no one was looking. When the judge finally read her verdict, I braced myself. She ruled in my favor. The courtroom felt like it inhaled all at once. My aunt gasped audibly. My uncle cursed under his breath. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady and strong. The will would be honored. The house, the assets, the responsibility, it was all mine. Not because I demanded it, but because someone saw me, really saw me, and made a choice that couldn't be undone by pride or pretense. Outside, the air was warm and still. Layla walked out beside me, silent for a long moment. Then she said, "They'll never forgive you, you know." I smiled faintly. They never forgave me for existing in the first place. "I'll survive." She looked at me and nodded. Yeah, you will. Then she walked away. As I stood there, watching the last of them disappear, I felt something lift. Not just the fear or the obligation but the shame. The feeling that I was less than, unworthy, burdensome. That identity had followed me for years like a shadow I couldn't shake. But it was gone now. Burned away by truth, sealed by love, and finally, legally, acknowledged. I went home and opened Nanny's letter again. Read it slowly. Then I placed it in a frame and hung it by the front door of my new home. Let them talk. Let them rage. I was no longer the maid at anyone's wedding. I was the woman who found her voice, and kept her name. The days after the court ruling moved slowly, like water finding a new course after the dam has been broken. My life didn't change in any grand cinematic way. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no late-night apologies from Aunt Farah or Uncle Tariq. If anything, the silence grew heavier. Their absence in my life, once a source of anxiety and shame, became a kind of clarity. I had always known where I stood with them. Now it was official. But there was something peaceful about that finality. I no longer needed to earn a place in their world. I had my own. The house felt different too. It wasn't just that it legally belonged to me now. It was the way it greeted me when I walked through the door. Quiet, open, as if even the walls were relieved that the pretense was over. I began spending my evenings in Nanny's old reading room, the one with the worn armchair and lace-curtained windows. I kept it just as she had left it, save for one change. Her letter now framed and resting on the side table. I would sit with my tea, watching the light change across the floorboards, and feel her presence in the silence. Not haunting, just watching. Maybe proud. Layla kept her word. She didn't just vanish after the ruling. She reached out regularly, though cautiously. At first, it was short messages, updates on her job, an article she thought I'd like, a memory of Nanny. Then one day, she asked if we could meet for lunch. I hesitated. Part of me still carried the sting of her wedding day. The laughter, the smug look she'd given me when she called me the maid. The way she let it all unfold without flinching. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the two of us playing hide and seek in Nanny's garden as children, was curious. So I said yes. We met at a small cafe downtown. Layla arrived early and stood when I walked in, a gesture so out of character I almost didn't recognize her. She looked nervous, unsure of herself, a far cry from the girl who had once held court in every family gathering. She ordered chamomile tea and hardly touched it. After a few minutes of awkward pleasantries, she got to the point. "I'm seeing a therapist," she said. For the first time. I didn't know how much I was carrying or projecting. I blinked, surprised. "That's good. I talked about you a lot, actually. About that day at the wedding. And the mic." I smiled slightly. "You mean the day everything exploded?" She winced. "Yeah." But the therapist said something that stuck with me. She said, "Sometimes, when you're raised to believe you're entitled to everything, anyone who refuses to shrink for you feels like a threat. I think I saw you as a threat, Zara. Because you never played the game the way I did." I didn't reply right away. Her words were honest, vulnerable even, but they didn't erase the years of hurt. Still, I respected her effort. She was trying. And that counted for something. We talked for nearly 2 hours that day. About Nanny. About the chaos in the family. About what it meant to grow up in a system where your worth was measured by your obedience. It didn't fix everything. But it opened a door that had been rusted shut for years. Meanwhile, the house began to come alive. I started small, painting the walls of my childhood bedroom a soft, warm yellow, replacing the stiff old drapes with airy linen curtains. I turned the guest room into a small study, with shelves for my books and a corner desk where I could write. I even began working on a book, a collection of essays about family, silence, and survival. It wasn't for anyone but me at first. Just a place to pour everything I had never been allowed to say. Word spread through the community that I had inherited the house, and to my surprise, people began reaching out. Former neighbors who remembered me as a quiet child. Students from my workshops who wanted guidance. Even a few estranged cousins, third or fourth removed, sent hesitant messages. It was strange. For so long, I had lived in the shadows of my family's hierarchy. Now I was visible. Not because I had forced myself to be, but because I had finally stopped hiding. There was one night in particular, maybe 2 months after the court decision, that stayed with me. It was a warm evening, the sky painted in soft oranges and purples. I stood in the backyard garden, where Nanny used to grow basil and roses. I had cleared the weeds, replanted fresh herbs, added a bench under the old mango tree. As I sat there, watching the breeze sway the leaves, I felt something settle in me. Peace, yes, but also purpose. This place, once the backdrop of my silence, was now a sanctuary. Not just for me but maybe someday for others like me. Girls told they were too quiet. Too much. Not enough. Girls made to feel like maids in their own stories. I reached out to the local community center and proposed a new program, the Voice Project. It would be a free weekend course for teenage girls navigating difficult family dynamics. A space to write, speak, share. When I explained the idea, the director's eyes lit up. "We need this," she said. "You're not the only one." The first session was small. Only 6 girls. Nervous. Hesitant. Unsure. But as I told them my story, not the dramatic wedding moment but the smaller stories, the time I got blamed for breaking a vase I hadn't touched, the way no one ever looked up when I entered a room, I saw their eyes widen. Not in pity but recognition. They knew. They understood. And as each of them took turns speaking, the space filled with something rare and powerful. Truth. That night, I came home and stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. For the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. Not because I looked different, but because I was no longer trying to be anything for anyone. I was just Zara. The girl who once swallowed her voice. The woman who picked up the mic. And she wasn't putting it down anytime soon. The months that followed brought quiet transformations. Not the kind that make headlines, but the kind that change the shape of a person's soul. I stopped walking with my shoulders tense, no longer anticipating the next dismissal, the next dig, the next moment someone would pretend I wasn't in the room. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. For the first time in my life, I felt not only visible, but necessary. And I began to realize that everything I had endured hadn't buried me. It had built me. The community center workshops flourished. Word of mouth spread, and soon our small room with 6 chairs needed to be moved to a bigger hall. Girls came in, some shy, some angry, some brittle with years of being ignored, and left a little taller, a little more sure of themselves. I watched them write stories, read poems, perform scenes where they got to speak their truth out loud. It was the kind of healing I never had growing up, but somehow, in helping them I found it too. Their courage fed mine. Their vulnerability reminded me of my own. And through it all, I kept thinking of Nanny, of how she would have smiled seeing all these girls using the voice she'd always believed I had. One afternoon, after one of the workshops, I stayed back to lock up. I sat in the empty hall, surrounded by scattered papers and half-stacked chairs, and felt a strange lump form in my throat. Not sadness. Something softer. Gratitude, maybe. Or awe. I thought about what Layla had said weeks ago, that she had finally started seeing herself clearly. I realized I had too. I wasn't just the cousin they called a maid. I wasn't the quiet girl in the corner. I was someone who could change things. Not with revenge, not with loud confrontations, but with truth. With showing up. With staying. Back at home, the seasons began to turn. Spring melted into summer, and the house settled around me like it had finally accepted me as its owner. I repainted the kitchen cabinets a cheerful sky blue and planted jasmine in the front garden. It wasn't about appearances. It was about creating beauty where pain had once lived. Every brushstroke, every blooming flower felt like reclaiming another piece of my past and rewriting it in softer colors. Neighbors stopped by more often. Some to say hello, some to drop off food, some just curious to see if the house had really changed hands. I welcomed them all. I wanted this place to feel open, not closed off like it had been for so long. One day, I received a letter. It had no return address, just my name on the front in a familiar slant. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper and a pressed hibiscus flower. I opened it slowly. It was from Layla. She wrote, "I know I've said things out loud, but I wanted to write them too. I'm sorry. For the wedding. For all the years I treated you like a rival instead of a sister. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I hope we can keep trying. P.S. The hibiscus is from Nanny's old plant. I went by the house one morning before work. I just stood at the gate. It looks beautiful. So do you. I didn't cry, but my heart clenched in that strange way it does when something old finds its way back to you, changed and softer. I pressed the note to my chest and took a deep breath. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a moment. It was a process. And maybe we had both finally started walking that road. I invited Layla over the next week for tea. It wasn't dramatic or emotional. We sat on the porch under the new trellis I'd built and talked about the weather, work, a new book she was reading. We didn't rehash everything. We didn't need to. There was a comfort in the simplicity, in letting the past be present without letting it dominate. When she left, she hugged me, gently, awkwardly, like we were still learning how to exist in this new space. I didn't pull away. At night, I often found myself thinking of the girl I used to be. The one standing at the edge of that wedding stage, microphone trembling in her hand, voice barely steady. I thought about how terrified I had been, but also how free. That moment hadn't just shifted my family dynamic. It had rewritten my entire identity. Speaking up had shattered the version of me they had created, and allowed me to step into the version I was always meant to be. And now, months later, I was still learning to live in that freedom. To not apologize for it. To not shrink from it. Sometimes I'd go into Nanny's room, my room now, and sit by her old dresser. I'd open the drawer where she kept small trinkets. Sewing needles, prayer beads, scraps of fabric. I'd run my fingers over them and smile. I imagined her watching me, shaking her head with that proud little smirk she always wore when I surprised her. "I knew you had it in you," I could almost hear her say. "You just needed to believe it." One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a local women's leadership panel. Apparently, someone from the community center had recommended me. My first instinct was to decline. Imposter syndrome whispered all its usual lies. But I stopped myself. The voice I had found wasn't just for weddings and workshops. It was for every room I walked into. So I accepted. And when the day came, I stood in front of a packed hall, heart pounding, palms sweating. But as I began to speak, the fear melted. I told them my story. Not just the mic moment, but the years before it. The silence. The shame. And how breaking it had broken me open, in the best possible way. When the applause came, it wasn't loud. It was steady, rising, warm. It filled the room like a sunrise. And in that moment, I felt something settle inside me. I wasn't performing. I wasn't proving. I was just being. Back home that night, I made myself a cup of tea and stepped outside. The jasmine was in full bloom. It scent soft and persistent. I looked at the sky, a deep velvet blue, and whispered, "We're okay now, Nanny." I wasn't sure if she could hear me, but I knew she would have understood. Time has a strange way of softening edges. The sting of that wedding day, the laughter, the whispers, the word "maid" thrown like an insult across the room, doesn't cut the same way anymore. It still lives in my memory, but not as an open wound. More like a scar I carry with quiet pride. That moment didn't break me. It birthed me. And though it took everything I had to speak into that mic, I've never regretted it. Because that was the day I reclaimed my story. Not as someone desperate for approval, not as someone waiting to be included, but as someone who finally realized she didn't need permission to matter. The house I once walked through like a guest is now my home. Its walls have heard the worst of my silence and the strongest echoes of my voice. I've filled it with books, laughter, the aroma of fresh jasmine and cardamom tea. The garden is blooming again, vibrant and full, a mirror of how I feel inside. I still visit Nanny's old chair on the veranda, sometimes with a notebook, sometimes just to sit. I no longer talk to her expecting answers. But I thank her often, for seeing the version of me that took me years to meet myself. Layla and I are still learning how to be family in this new chapter. There are no sweeping declarations of love or sisterhood. But we show up. She came to one of my workshops quietly, sat in the back, and cried during a poem a young girl read about being called invisible at the dinner table. Afterwards she said to me, "That poem was about us, wasn't it?" I just nodded. It didn't need to be said aloud. Healing doesn't always arrive in big moments. It sneaks in through presence, through listening, through staying even when it's uncomfortable. And Layla, for once, stayed. As for the rest of the family, I stopped waiting for apologies. Aunt Farah and Uncle Tariq moved on, bitter in their silence. I no longer check their social media or ask mutual relatives what they've been saying. Their version of the story is not my burden to carry anymore. I've let go of the need to be understood by those who never tried to understand me. My peace no longer depends on their acknowledgement. These days, I speak at more events. Sometimes in schools, sometimes at women's centers. My story has found its way into rooms I never imagined entering. And every time I take a mic now, I smile to myself. That word, mic, it still holds weight. It still reminds me of a moment when the girl they laughed at stood taller than anyone expected and told the truth without shaking. I used to think legacy was something only people like Nanny had. The matriarchs, the women who left behind wills and properties and framed diplomas. But now I know better. Legacy is also in the voices we give back to others. It's in the girl who came up to me after a seminar last month and whispered, "Thank you for showing me I'm not just the quiet one." It's in the way I now love without shrinking, speak without flinching, walk without apologizing. I may have walked into that wedding as the girl they all overlooked. But I walked out as the woman they'll never forget.